Okay, so this is Shelby, my friend, who came over exactly for this speech. And this is Alden, my new acquaintance that I met 2 weeks ago. I introduced my dogs. My dogs are also going to be my audience since I waited until last minute, so I could only find a few people to sit in for my speech. I used this book right here as a resource and another book. Alright, so my persuasive speech, I chose to begin with the legalization of marijuana, and I feel the best way to begin this speech is by talking about the history. So back in the 1930s, they had prohibition. The late 1920s, early 1930s, they went through prohibition. And during that time, they illegalized any type of alcohol. Now, way back when in the day, like during the Civil War, George Washington, during the Civil War, realized that he didn't have enough supplies to supply his servicemen with clothing, food, even housing, and he realized that the hemp plant, or the marijuana plant, supplied them with all these supplies. And because it's a weed plant, it's continuously growing, and it was actually an overwhelming of this great supplier. So George Washington made it to where he fined you if you didn't grow this hemp plant in your yard, specifically to help him support the Civil War. So if it wasn't for the marijuana plant, they probably would have been able to get the supplies to actually finish out the war. So it was legal back then, and in fact, you had to pay money if you didn't have this plant. So how did we get from that point to now where people are being sent to jail for 20 years for having a plant that grows so naturally within holding of themselves? Well, like I said earlier, during the Prohibition, they made it to where they had to target when the alcohol was no longer legal, and when it became legalized again, they had to target their attention to something else. So they paid attention to the marijuana plant. And the marijuana plant fit so perfectly because you also had the railroad system being built by that time, and the paper industry. So the railroads were being built by using the papers, the trees that they would cut down. They were using that income to help build those railroads. So if people realized that it was costing too much to pay for paper when they could just use the hemp plant, then they realized that the business for the paper industry would go out of business, and in turn the railroad system would go out of business. So they had to get together, since the officers weren't able to arrest anybody for bootlegging and the paper and railroad company were all going out of business. They all got together and made this quote-unquote propaganda about marijuana and how bad it is, so it would deter people from buying the plant. So they started posting out, and my friend actually has a clipping, the original clipping of the newspaper, where it says that if you smoke marijuana, your wife will sleep with a Negro. Like, they had propaganda so bad to where they were, how do I want to say this? They were pinpointing exactly to the population at that time and making it to where people were afraid to smoke. That's where you got the movie Reefer Madness and all the bad politics when it comes to marijuana. It was solely based out of someone's greed, out of 3 different companies' greed, and then the government helped because the police force was trying to target their area of police force, I guess you could say. So from there, when you start thinking about how the marijuana is starting to grow, you realize that in the different states like Colorado and California, and we actually have it medically, they're starting able to do a lot of tests on marijuana and realize that it's not nearly as bad as what they said it was in the past. I mean, if you were to compare it to things like cigarettes, for example, cigarettes back in the day were a huge thing, and they were telling people to consistently smoke. They were using cartoons in their commercials to engage younger groups to start smoking, because they knew if they started the habit young, they would have continuous income of money, or a source of income, throughout the rest of that person's life. That's a lot of money. I mean, people are spending over $2,000 a year just for cigarettes. So when you think of how much money they're making on prescription drugs, how much money they're making on alcohol, they're going to continuously legalize it. But because marijuana is a natural growing plant, they can't have any type of law that tells them that you can't have this, because it's a natural plant. Making tobacco, you have to have that certain chemicals built in to make a cigarette. Even though it's tobacco, unless you're going to smoke natural tobacco, you're not going to have the same type of high. So they have to make sure that they have some type of legal document going over marijuana so they can make some type of income on it. And that's what they're doing in Colorado and everything, so it's making it a little bit easier. But now that they're doing the medical testing on these plants, they're realizing that medical marijuana helps in tons of different ways. People who have seizures, people who have cancer, are able to eat, sleep, tons of benefits that come with marijuana. And then you have people who are always saying, oh, well, if you drive high, you're more likely to die. Statistically speaking, if you look at anything, just driving in general is dangerous, right? Driving when you're drunk, that's even worse than driving high. Now, I know plenty of friends who have gone out and done things high. They seem to be a little bit more on the paranoid side. So most of the time, they spend their time either walking around the park, talking amongst each other, or just relaxing. That's the natural way of smokers. But when you see anybody who's drinking, they're usually really rowdy. There's a lot of cases of rape when you come with alcohol. There's a lot of statistically speaking, there's a lot more accidents when it comes to alcohol. Alcohol in general is just a man-made substance that's so much worse for the economy statistically. Right? So why are we still looking at facts and records of previous mistakes, and they all happen to be based around alcohol? We even teach in the military that, you know, if you drink alcohol, be more aware of what it is that you're doing, because anything alcohol related can have you kicked out of the Marine Corps or have you kicked out of any type of military branch. Like, they're locking down so much on alcohol. Prescription drugs now have such a great influence on money and power and big companies that they're having a really hard time making marijuana legal. And I'm not saying we have to make marijuana legal and smoking, recreational. All of that would be nice to give someone the free will to smoke a plant. But I'm talking solely based on the medication portion of it, or even just using it for supplies, whether that be paper, whether that be clothes, whatever it may be. But if we keep on going the way we're going, global warming, especially with deforestation, like, it makes a huge impact when we're cutting all these trees, when we could be using a weed plant that grows continuously. For every tree, for every weed plant we could be using, we could be saving 5 trees. That's the equivalent of it. So why are we being so stupid and so selfish and sending people out to jail when we don't need to? Why are we not saving money, saving earth, by just using a weed plant, by legalizing the hemp plant itself? There's no need for us to illegalize something that's so natural and so helpful. So hopefully you guys have a better understanding of how it became illegal, the good and the bad that comes with marijuana, and why it should be legal in my eyes, because there's no reason why it shouldn't. Thank you.